Hi, your time now is exactly 1 minute past 6. A very good morning to you and welcome to the Tuesday edition of Kusile Breakfast Show right here on Eswatini TV. My name is Kusile. It's not a one-woman show. As always, I do have in the studio my fabulous co-host and colleague,
Fabulous. Fabulous. Is very flattering. Thank you.
How are you? Fitting. I'm good. How are you?
Doing very well. I hope the viewers at home are doing just as well. It's a good morning indeed. So showers of blessings yesterday that blessed the kingdom of Eswatini. We wake up in very good spirit. But this morning, a very important conversation. We are talking two different and yet important events that have just wrapped up here in the Kingdom of Eswatini. The annual Umhlanga Reed Dance, of course, we witnessed and enjoyed the main day yesterday, the 8th of September, as well as the Eswatini International Trade Fair 2025, which culminated to its ending this past weekend that we are wrapping up. On the surface, they may sit opposite ends of the spectrum, but one is a centuries-old cultural tradition and the other a modern-day showcase of business and innovation. But together, they all tell us something important about where Eswatini is headed, how heritage and commerce intertwine, and how both can drive economic momentum. So from the surge in tourism as well as the hospitality to the trade opportunities as well as the SME exposure, what is the real bottom line? I'll put those questions to our economist, Sanela Bia, as we explore the economic ripple effects of culture as well as commerce colliding, that conversation happening in what? In exactly, let's say, 27 minutes with Sanela Bia, we're having that conversation. So do stay tuned for that, as well as appreciating other visuals of some of the current affairs, things that eventuated in the Kingdom of Eswatini, Itolo, Gusa, Kwalamuhla. Good morning once again.
And before that conversation, allow me to fill you in on some global events making headlines this morning. France has been plunged into a new political crisis with the defeat of Prime Minister Francois Bayrou at a confidence vote in the National Assembly. This means the defeat by 364 votes to 194 means that Bayrou will on Tuesday today present his government resignation to France President Emmanuel Macron, who must now decide how to replace him. Also in other news, Nepal has lifted the social media ban after it led to clashes between protesters, and that also left at least 19 people dead. Thousands of young people had forced their way into Parliament building in the capital Kathmandu on Monday, asking the government to lift its ban on 26 social media platforms, including Facebook and YouTube. Otherwise, this is Kusile Breakfast Show. We'll now go for a brief break. It's not a break, actually. We do have...
Just a bumper.
Just a bumper, right. We do have... we'll take a look at what is making headlines in print this morning. We're going to take a look now at some of the headlining stories locally when it comes to our newspapers. We're starting off with the Eswatini Observer, where we see the Zulu King crowns Lipovela. This actually happened at the Reed Dance that took place yesterday. Historic Umhlanga, where we also had two Emapovelas. That was a beautiful merge of culture, you know, between the Zulu and the Eswatini people. Also on that story, thousands roar in approval ululation as King Misuzulu plucks fiancé Likwala Kwala to formally crown her in front of their majesties. Another headlining stories, 7 killed during the long weekend. In other stories, Eswatini mid ex-CFO breaks silence on judge's recusal.
I will look at the back end of the Eswatini Observer print publication this morning, making the top story there. And Nsingizini Hotspurs win 8-bet Trade Fair Cup. Yeki is qualities, the headline. They say Madumane wins second individual going in less than 4 months, while Nsingizini bag 8-bet Trade Fair Cup thanks to qualities free kick. And Muzi wins 7,000 Emalangeni Golden Boot Award, while Paraba was named the best goalkeeper. In other news, Pennington has been crowned champ and his pockets filled with 20,000 Malangeni. That is our local pro golfer, James Pennington, who once again showed his class after claiming 20,000 Malangeni first prize in the three-day Kings Cup pre-qualifiers at the Eswatini Royal Eswatini golf course. And then Eswatini clinches 3 gold medals. That is in swimming, where Eswatini closed the Africa Aquatics Zone Swimming and Open Water Championships on a triumphant note, scooping 3 gold medals in the open water segment as well as the competition. And then correctional, Sunrise dominate Eswatini International Trade Fair Mula Sport Tourney. His Majesty's Correctional Services Sunrise volleyball teams once again stamped their authority during this year's Eswatini International Trade Fair Elite Volleyball Tournament, and they claimed top honors in both the men's and women's divisions, walking away with 14,000 Emalangeni. Last story, mission accomplished. That is according to Derek Shiva, the Nsingizini Hotspurs president, who said that they had achieved their mission in the 8-bet trade fair. A lot of wins by local sides here. Beautiful stories this morning.
On the Eswatini Daily News front page this morning, King Misuzulu gets hitched to Undlunkulu Lamawewe at Umhlanga. In another story that you can find on page 3 of the Eswatini Daily News, Umhlanga Redance main day thrills thousands at Lutsitsini Wa residents. Another story, FNB disburses 250 million Malangeni to support over 1,000 small medium enterprises. And a story on page 1 of the Eswatini Daily News, Prime Minister His Excellency Russell Dlamini urges transformative climate finance for Africa's sustainable future.
The back end of this publication, this is the Eswatini Daily News Sport. The top story, Cup win CAF morale booster. Sentiments by Derek Shiva, the Nsingizini Hotspurs president, who says their goal is to win 3 titles as club also dominates this year's 8-bet Trade Fair Cup awards. In other stories, Kings Golf Cup 2025, over 90,000 Emalangeni for pros and amateurs, while Ribeiro pays emotional farewell to Mamelodi Sundowns. 8 minutes after 6, you're watching Kusile Breakfast Show. This is the Tuesday edition. Thank you for waking up with us. We'll go for a net break. We'll be back with our local news in vernacular.
Eswatini TV has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Eswatini Communications Commission. We are committed to reporting news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. For any complaints of our programming, please contact us on 2411-9600 or email info@eswatinitv.co.za. You can also contact the Eswatini Communications Commission on 2406-7000 or write a letter to ECCOM on PO Box 7811 Mbabane. Email address is info@ecom.org.sz.
Ngiphinza ngikuvusela ngolomhle nathi tindzaba tekucala lisuku. Baholi bemave nabohulumende base-Afrika kufaka ekhatsi tinhlangano letitimele kanye nebantfu labasha sebavumelene ngavilinye ukuthi i-Afrika idzinga tisombululo letitawuchamuka ngekhatsi i-Afrika kuti lelivekati lilwe nekugucuka kwesimo selitulu liphindze lithole indlela yokuthola imali yekwesekela tinhlelo tekumelana nako kugucuka kwesimo selitulu. Lokhu kuvele nakuvulwa ngalosemtsetfweni umhlangano wesibili wayo Afrika wekulwa nekugucuka kwesimo selitulu. Lomhlangano ubanjelwe e-Addis Ababa eveni le-Ethiopia.
Umhlonishwa Ndvunankhulu Russell Dlamini ufike nakudzabuka kusa ngemsombuluko esikhumulweni setindiza i-Addis Ababa Bole International Airport eveni leTopia. Libandla laNdvunankhulu lifake ekhatsi indvuna yetekuvakasha umhlonishwa Jensi Milane kanye nalobambe kuba indvuna yetangephandle umhlonishwa Phila Buthelezi. Ngemvulo ekuseni Ndvunankhulu uvukele emhlanganweni wesibili wekulwa nekugucuka kwesimo selitulu i-Africa Climate Change Summit. Ngaphambi kokuqala kwalomhlangano longenelwe baholi abangama-45 kanye nebantu labafikako etinkulungwaneni letingama-25. Baholi baqale ngekuhlanyela tihlahla lekungumkhankaso wenhlangano yebunye bemave ase-Afrika wekulwa nekugucuka kwesimo selitulu i-African Union Great Grand Wall Initiative. Lo mhlangano lubanjwe ngaphansi kwesicubulo lesigcile kakhulu ekutheni umhlaba ugijime ngalamakhulu emagonso ekutholeni isisombululo tekulwa nekugucuka kwesimo selitulu kanye nekwesekelwa kwetinhlelo tase-Afrika tekumelana nekugucuka kwesimo selitulu uvulwe ngalokusemthethweni nguNdvunankhulu welive laseTopia umhlonishwa Abiy Ahmed Ali. Abiy Ahmed umemetele uhlelo lolusha lekuthiwa yi-Africa Climate Innovation Compact loluhlose ukuthi nakufika umnyaka wa 2030 kube sekunebantu labayinkulungwane labatawuchamuka nemasu lajulile ekusita i-Afrika ekulweni nekugucuka kwesimo selitulu. Uthi lolu hlelo lutawuba lwayo i-Afrika futhi lutawusekelwa yimali yase-Afrika ngekubanjiswa hlobo tayo.
Excellencies, we're not here to negotiate our survival. We're here to design the world's next climate economy. If we make the right choices now, Africa can be the first continent to industrialize without destroying its ecosystems.
Labanye baholi labathule inkulumo kulomhlangano bafaka ekhatsi mengameli waseKenya William Ruto lengusihlalo libandla lebaholi base-Afrika lababuka indzaba tekugucuka kwesimo selitulu. Mengameli we-COP29 lekuyindvuna yetemvelo eveni le-Azerbaijan kanye namengameli we-COP30 wase-Brazil lapho kutawubanjelwa khona i-COP30 kulomnyaka. Bonke labaholi bavumelene ngavilinye ukuthi sesifikile isikhathi ukuthi emasu ekulwa nokugucuka kwesimo selitulu e-Afrika achamuke khona e-Afrika. Labaholi bacele ukuthi kwentiwe tingucuko etikhwameni tekusekela emave lasathuthuka ngemali ingani bakhala ngekuthi kulukhuni ukuthola imali ekwesekela tinhlelo tekulwa ne-climate change kule tikhwama. Lo mhlangano kubheka ukuthi uchubeke elangeni langalwesibili kanti-ke kutawubukwa ukuthi i-Afrika imelana njani ne-climate change nekuthi ichubeka njani nekukhicita kudla lokwenele kulokunye. Kubika lengithini Gule ngise-Addis Ababa eTopia.
Ingonyama Mswati wesithathu useyicele ukuthi sisebenzele ngalokuphelele sikhwama sekusita emave lashayeke kakhulu ngenxa yokugucuka kwesimo selitulu. Inkulumo yengonyama yethulwe ngumhlonishwa Ndvunankhulu Russell Dlamini emhlanganweni wemave ase-Afrika wekulwa nokugucuka kwesimo selitulu. Lo mhlangano ubanjelwe eveni le-Ethiopia.
Ethula inkulumo yengonyama Mswati wesithathu kulomhlangano umhlonishwa Ndvunankhulu Russell Dlamini usilakangwane litimisele ekuchubeka nekwehlisa tintfuthu letinyokubeta imvelo lide kude lokunganani lelikufakako lokupepetela kugucuka kwesimo selitulu. Ndvunankhulu uthi uhulumende uyachubeka nekuhlanyela imali ehlangothini lwetekulima ikakhulukati ekulimeni ngekonga nangekusebentisa tebuchwephesha. Uthi uhulumende uyayifaka imali ekuphehleni gesi longanyukubeta imvelo njengagesi welilanga. Ndvunankhulu usilakangwane lihambisana ngco nalamanye emave ase-Afrika ukuthi sale sisebenta phela sikhwama sekusita imave lashayeke kakhulu kugucuka kwesimo selitulu i-Damage and Losses Fund.
The Kingdom of Eswatini joins the call in the draft declaration for transformative climate financing, moving from aid to strategic investments in local innovation. We need equitable access to finance, reform of global funding mechanisms, including multilateral development banks to increase concessional finance and African representation, and debt instruments that enable climate action without burdening our economies. We emphasize the operationalization of the fund for responding to loss and damage, the new collective quantified goal on climate finance, and high integrity carbon markets through initiatives like the Africa Action Plan on Carbon Markets.
Ndvunankhulu uthi kusendiwa tingucuko ngendlela lekuphehlwa ngayo gesi sive asingasali bumnyameni. ucele emave lanjengile ukuthi asekele ngemali tinhlelo te-Afrika tekuphehla gesi.
Energy transitions should not leave our people in the dark. They must create jobs, strengthen local value chains, and ensure access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. For the Kingdom of Eswatini, this means harnessing our potential in solar and hydropower while protecting the livelihoods of those dependent on traditional energy sources. We call for international support to implement key continental initiatives, including the Africa Single Electricity Market, the Continental Power Systems Master Plan, and the Africa Clean Cooking Program to achieve an equitable global energy transition and raise Africa's share of renewable energy financing to at least 20% by 2030. The Kingdom of Eswatini believes that the outcomes of this summit, the Addis Ababa Declaration, and the accompanying call to action must be actionable, measurable, and fully aligned with Africa's broader development goals.
Lakangwane kubheka ukuthi libe ingcenye yemave letfela tinhlelo talo letinsha tekulwa nekuguquka kwesimo selitulu i-National Determined Contributions emhlanganweni wabaholi bemave emhlaba lotawubanjelwa edolobheni le-New York kule nyanga lesetulu. Kubika lengithini kule ngise-Ethiopia.
Baholi bemtsabu nemakhosi bathi buholi bemtsabu abatiwe nakulamanye emave kude lobuholi nemasiko ungashabalali. Labaholi bathi lokhu kungendanga ukuthi kwengetwe emave laba yingcenye yalomhlangano eminyakeni letako.
Ngelilanga lokugcina lalomhlangano tikhulumo letehlukene tithi tifundzela okuningi ngekugcina buholi bemakhosi kulaseSwatini. Induna yetinkhundla umhlonishwa Sikhumbuzo Dlamini ithi live liyatichenya ukuthi bekungeta bemave lahlukene batobuka bafunze ngendlela yebuholi kulakangwane.
Lo mhlangano na osicalo lesihle njengoba sisho ukuthi batobuka ukuthi Silve Kangwane lento enjani lona. Sina nje Silve Kangwane nathi siyajabula lokuthi kulenye inhlangothi sihlale siphuma siya ngaphandle amanye amave siyo benchmark siyofuna ama best practices but lamuhla eAfrica yonke itekithi Kangwane itobuta ukuthi sente njani. Lo sho ukuthi ngemnyaka lotako basitawo mixal paper njenkosini yalo lapho khona sebavumene kwalo ukuthi bawucela enkosini ukuthi ibavumele ukuthi lo msebenzi uhostel ekhaya sebavele bayendile declaration lapho khona ingibobe emhlaba bayicela ukuthi ihambe yaba presenter leli paper labo noma le declaration yabo ka African Union ku next summit lesithemba ukuthi itabana kusuka umnyaka lotako nakhona lapho sebatikhulumile into nizaba leto bavumelana lokuthi vele akuvele kube njalo yena kunene kungangaye ukuthi beyangabacelela kuyo iAfrica kubo balingani bakhe baholi bemave beAfrica.
Tikhuluma ngekwehlukana tithe ngalokutako kumele kubanjwane lamanye emave emhlabeni adinge kubusa kwemakhosi nebuholi bemtsabu.
The office of His Majesty or the delegated office must issue official invitations to the kingdoms. This we are suggesting that it be done so that we can ensure that all the kingdoms that are recognized and recognizable in the continent can also take part in that conference.
The issue of the translation, just in case we host the first, the next conference is going to be much bigger than this one. So in case we had people from the other side of maybe that don't understand English.
Bathi-ke bavumelene ukuthi buholi bengwenyama inkosi Mswati wesithathu abusebenze emhlanganweni lotako lapho kutawukhulunywa khona ngebuholi bemtsabu. Bathi-ke bayancoma ukuthi kubukwe luhla lokusebenta lwayo ingwenyama lokutawuse ukuthi lo mhlangano ubanjwe nayikhululekile ngekusebenta kwayo inkosi. Lobikako nguGiyani Msibi ngisesibayeni lodge kumathapha.
Iphalamende yelive lakangwane seyisayine isivumelwano sekusebenzisana nephalamende yelive leMozambique. Lesivumelwano sitawenda ukuthi kube nekushiyelana lwati kulamaphalamende lamabili etigabeni letahlukene tekusebenta letfaka ekhatsi inchubo yekusebenta kanye neqinisa budlelwano kulamave lamabili. Lesivumelwano sisayinwe emcimbini wesidlo sasekuseni lebesibanjelwe ezulwini.
Lesivumelwano lesiyingqophamlando kulamave lamabili sisayinwe emkhatsini wemalunga ephalamende akuleli eMozambique kanye nemalunga ephalamende lasuka ephalamende yase-Afrika, i-Pan-African Parliament kanye nalamanye emalunga ephalamende lasuka kulamanye emave. Akhuluma kulo msebenzi wekusayinwa kwalesivumelwano, umcondzisi wetinkulumo umhlonishwa Jabulani Mabuza uthi lesivumelwano sicinisa kutibophelela ekutfutfukiseni bantfu kulamave lamabili.
Your Excellency, as we sign this Memorandum of Understanding, let us be guided by the spirit of Ubuntu, the wisdom of our traditions, and the aspirations of our citizens.
Uthi kusasayina lesivumelwano kufanele bonke bacondziswe bunfu nekuhlakanipha lokulethwa ngemasiko alamave omabili. Uthi kunesidzingo sekuthi kube semcondvweni wabo bonke, ikakhulu loko lokudzingwa bantfu balamave.
Through this MOU, we affirm our dedication to capacity building, procedural harmonization, and the exchange of best practices in parliamentary governance.
Mengameli wetimphunga Lindiwe Dlamini uthi lesivumelwano sitawusita kutsi kube nekucecesheka kushiyelana lwati lwenchubo yephalamende kanye nelwati lwetemasiko alamave. Uthi lolu vakasho luhambisana naloko lokumenyetelwe ngemakhosi kutsi lokwentiwako akwentiwe masinyane ikakhulu etinhlelweni tentfutfuko.
Excelências, a cooperação bilateral entre os nossos países é bastante positivo, senão podíamos dizer que é muito excelente.
Umcondzisi wetinkulumo eveni leMozambique umhlonishwa Margarita Adamuki Dalapa uthi lesivumelwano sibaluleke kakhulu ngoba sikhombisa ukuthi baholi balamave lamabili bafise kubona bantfu balamave batfutfuka, ikakhulu nekwekuthi lesifundza sase-Afrika kube khona kubambisana. Uthi balive laseMozambique batawenta siciniseko ukuthi konke lokudzingekile kuba khona kuze lesivumelwano siphatheke. Lokusayina kwalesivumelwano kwenteka nje baholi balamave lamabili bebabambe tinkhulumo tekucinisa budlelwano balamave kuwo lomnyaka. Lo msebenzi wekusayina kwalesivumelwano bowungenelwe nayinkosi yelive laseMalawi, indlovukazi yaseVenda kanye-ke nebantfu abenkosi labasuka eNingizimu Afrika. Kubika Sondomlangeni, Ezulwini.
Libhange lelikhulu litawusukumisa lihlelo letibuciko lokuthi bosomabhizinisi bakhona ukubhalisela kuthengisela leli bhange lokuvetwe nguWarren Dlamini lolisekela lalubukete kuthengwa kwempahla kuleli bhange levetile ukuthi lolu hlelo kubheke ukuthi lethule ngalokuphelele enyangeni letako. Dlamini uvete lokhu ngesikhathi ukufundziswa bosomabhizinisi ngekuthengisela libhange lelikhulu impahla enhlanganweni lobubanjwe le-Trade Fair kaManzini ngalesihlanu.
Bank emathuba ebhizinisi akhona and avulekele wonke umuntu lo liswati nalongasilo liswati lokhona eveni lone business lesebentako eveni and sase sesiphindze kwesibili sethula isystem noma luhlelo lesitalisebentisa lo lisebenta ngabongqondlomshina lapho khona bosomabhizinisi bangabhalisa khona tinkampani tabo batifake kuze ukuthi titokhona kusebenta ne-Central Bank. Inkampani kufanele isebente le-Central Bank Tsatsothukhu inkampani kufanele ukuthi ibe inkampani lesemthethweni eveni kube inkampani leulandzelako umthetho lenawo emaphepha la igunyata ukuthi isebente eveni laKangwane ngalokusemthethweni futhi sibukeke tinkampani letiulandzelako phela umthetho wemthelo welive laKangwane sibukene tinkampani letinawo nje cishe onkhana emaphepha lakhona langakhona ukuthi atende ukuthi tikhone kusebenta ngalokusemthethweni eveni.
Litiko letemabhizinisini kuthengiselana selichaze kabanti ukuthi ngumaphi emabhizinisi latawuthola kwesekelwa ngaphansi kwemahhovisi ekusita bosomabhizinisi kanye nebahlanyeli imali eBusiness One Stop Shop lesesibekelo building eMbabane nokwethu mavuso lobuke tinhlelo kulelo visi ukuthi inhloso ukuthi bahlanyeli imali bathole lonke lisito lokuvula nekuchuba ibhizinisi endzaweni yinye.
Njengoba sekuphele tinyanga letibalelwa kuleti sithupha usukunyisiwe umsebenzi wekusita bosomabhizinisi ikakhulu bahlanyela imali ngemininingwane yekusungula kanye nekuchuba ibhizinisi kuleli i-Business One Stop Shop. Sikhulumisene nalobuketa inhlelo kuva ukuthi nguluphi luhlobo lwabosomabhizinisi labatfola lusito ngaphansi kwalamahhovisi.
We have defined ukuthi somabhizinisi noma umtshali imali ungubani. In this case, umtshali imali wangephandle kufuna abe na 10 million to qualify ukuthi cha sengumtshali imali walaveni. Bese ke walakhaya ngoba naye sikamshiyi ngephandle simbukele ukuthi naye from 3 million either in cash or assets uya qualify for the services leso offerishako under this roof ukuze usakhona naye ukuthi operations akhe aqhubeke. We have the Ministry of Commerce, ukhona company registrar lo settled or rather lo khona la ka one stop shop, sinaye trading license lo khona la ka one stop shop. Bese sesina home affairs sinalaba buke emavisa basita apply emavisa phinde sibe nalaba sita apply ema work permits. The last one is Eswatini Revenue Services lo sita nge-tin application nema payments aka commerce.
Litiko letemabhizinisi nekuthengiselana liyachubeka nemetamo yekukhanga abahlanyeli imali kuleli kute kuthuthuke umnotho kwakheke nemathuba yemisebenzi. Lokhu kufaka ekhatsi umsebenzi lo wendiwe litiko ngenyanga yeNkhwekhweti kulomnyaka lapho khona abahlanyeli imali bathembise kusungula imisebenzi leyahlukene lebalelwa ku-37 billion emalangeni. Lobikako nginelisiwe Ndlangamandla nginavuma inkosi inzinisa kaManzini.
Ngakemidlalo umphathi welicembu leNsingizini Hotspurs Derek Shiba uthi kuphakamisa inzebe yesibili kulomnyaka lokuyinzebe ye-8-bit trade fair kulandzela kuphakamisa inzebe ye-MTN Premier League etinyangeni letendlulile kuyinkhomba yokuthi liphupho lakhe liyafezeka lekugcina abona lelicembu liba yingxenye yemacembu lamakhulu eveni kanye naselivekatini lase-Afrika. Insingizini Hotspurs ihambe ekhaya nemali lengu-630,000 emalangeni.
Umchuthelwano we-8-bit trade fair walonyaka ubona licembu leNsingizini Hotspurs libaboshampiyoni balenzebe lapho khona bahambe ekhaya nemali lengu-630,000 emalangeni kulandzela kushaya licembu leGreen Mamba ngeligoli linye ecanzeni. Umphathi waleli cembu Derek Shiba uthi kancane kancane liphupho lakhe lekubona leli cembu liba yingxenye yemacembu lamakhulu eveni kanye nalapha e-Afrika liyafezeka.
This is exciting for me. It gives me motivation to continue investing in this football club. If you can look at the players absent, we've got 5 players in the national team, and we've got also 5 injuries, and those are starters. So it shows me that there's future. It shows me that the investment we did in the technical department is paying off for the team and for the country as well, because even in Africa, we want to put a very good showing in terms of participation.
Badlali abadlale kahle kulomchuthelwano kube ngeke Khumalo wayo Insingizini kanye naMuzi Thabethe weManzini Sibet lothola umkhomelo wa-top goal scorer kulomchuthelwano.
Ngicabanga ukuthi kude lokunganani phase kwami ukudimisela and lokusiyodlala ngaphandle there, I mean scouts out there ufuna ngidimisele onke malanga. Ngicabanga ukuthi sengi-improvile ku-endurance and speed and endurance. Ngicabanga ukuthi nasengiyadimisela sengiyawafaka manje.
Le award le ngiyitholile top goal scorer. I'm so grateful ngayo. Eze isibethi besolo sistrugglisha manje kuma tournament la kanje. But nje ekugcineni uNkulunkulu wabangakithi.
Sihlalo wenhlangano yePremier League udumise wonke amacembu langenelela umchuthelwano waphindze waveta ukuthi lokudimisela kuyinkhomba ukuthi isizini lensha itawuba yinhle sibili.
But ke siyabonga lokuthi naba bantu ba supportile labathanza ibhola njengaloko nibona nje stadium lesigwele siphuphuma lokusho kona ukuthi onke lama team alungise kahle. Sekude team longayikhobosa uthi lena team lencane lena team lenjani. So kuleso sigaba nje singathi sibonga kakhulu ema-team lokuthi athi preparishe kangaka ukuthi kubonakale neNsingizini nayo siyayihalalisela ukuthi wine salalisele neGreen Mamba ukuthi ifike kuma-finals salalisele onke nje ama-team la-participatile kule tournament.
Kulomunye umdlalo wema-losers final icembu leManzini Sibet lishaye uBombo Sugar FC ngemagoli 2-1. Lo bikako ngumpendulo kumbi kanti umbiko uhlanganiswe nguFabrice Msonera eMbabane.
Umphathi wenhlangano yemidlalo yokubhukusha noZipho Mahlalela uthi kuhlanganisa umqhudelwano we-open water wokubhukusha eLuphohlo Dam kungumsebenzi lobathathe inyanga letilinganiselwa kuleti 6. Mahlalela uthi lokuhamba embili kulomsebenzi ukuthi indzaba yekuphepha kwetinhlambi ngesikhathi tisemandini. Mahlalela bekakhuluma emuva ukuthi lenhlangano idlalise umqhudelwano we-open water challenge we-zone 4 championship lebobanjelwe khona eLuphohlo Dam.
Ngicabanga sile competition sesina 30 years sihosta azange sekube nesilwane lesiluma bantwana bakhona timfishi and bantwana basuke bathi ke ukuthi timfishi emadada leto tilwane nje letihlala edamini tiba khona basuke bakwati lokho.
Siyabonga.
Siye siqale 6 months ungakaqala umsebenzi siteste emandi wekuthi eteni kungcola negula. Then sibuye after 3 months again test lamandi. Then 7 days before competition siphinze siwa test ukuthi eteni kugula. Lokunye ke siye assess them from 7 days. Sisuke sesine team on site le make sure ukuthi ku setupiwe kuhlobile emandini sibanetikepe letitako nato titohlola in terms of safety for bamfana. And then we also sisebenzisana nabo tinkampani efana nabo Swazi Trails baye basiboleke tikepe tabo nebatali nje lesinabo ku association bayasiboleka tikepe and nema technical officials la khona la trainiwe nema medical teams abakhona on site ngelanga le event.
Ngolumhleti indzaba defu ngelulwimi lweSwati lecalati lusuku namhla ekseni sithatha likhefu nasibuya sicocisana na economist Sanele Sibiya.
Befayatshela yona khona butsotsi lobukhona ufuna kwendiwa la bekusolo ungashinji ngani nango ngombuto wami kodwa sesiyabona late la ukuthi bafuna kula kukhona lapha sibamba khona kunenhloso mina ngitelwa vele kuna provident fund na pension fund uthi kolombuto sekandijela ukuthi uyahambisana lento ngikhothana sekuhlanganiswe la leya bukwani khuluma ngalento lebasifundisa ngayo lenkundleni nini vele uyabona silwane na hembe nishaye singisi nani keva nangu conversion conversion siyama conversion kufana nenguquko lo mantshitho ususi automatic uye kumanyoa lalela ke lethi tinguquko letinhle hembe nawe silwane lalela inzuzo bathi sekuke umuntu longeka khona kuba ingcenye yale nguquko sibani lokho ukuthi noma formal sector no informal sector lokho ukuthi nathi thina sisebenza la emakhaya sino pensionable sonke but khona imali etafuna ithingete la lalela kude imali leta ungeteka yesilwane leyobo uvele umqasha akufakela yona nawe uyifaka good lana ku upgrade kuyamarinedwa lana silwane uyangifaka ukuthi ngithini Shona gogo ufuna ukutshela mina wena ukuthi inyalo provident fund sitaba ngilo pension fund sitaba betlo provident ngisho lokho nje nami bakhuluma ngeminyaka lapha ukuthi lona 45 kuyela yena ayimfaki lendzaba bathi kusuka nje ku45 kuya le utawuchubeka wena nale provident fund kodwa ke kuyendansi ku45 senithola le nguquko le sesengena kulese nivele nebuyiswa ngala nithi walila kule nguquko lo sethola siba pensionable so masifika eminyaka nokupension sesiyakhona kuvela first level yinhle kakhulu lento lena esibane yinhle ngoba sichazeli le yinhle bangulela kuhle gogo yebo
The Board of Directors, Management and Staff of Eswatini Med wish their Majesties and the entire Eswatini nation a happy 57th independence. Halala Kingdom of Eswatini.
Isikhathi ngaphandle kwalesi
aba research
bafunze. Being risky means ukuthi nalokuwa kwayo kulula.
Nathi kufuna senze ukukhicita lokusembili.
All right, welcome back. It's exactly 36 minutes after 6 this morning. We're getting into a very important conversation with our economist, Sanela Sibia, who joins us now virtually on our Zoom video link. Of course, we are discussing what we saw this past weekend, Umhlanga culminating to its main day yesterday in what was a beautiful show of pageantry, of song, of dance, as well as of unity in Africa, as well as the globe, if I do say so myself. I was there myself. I saw a lot of tourists, had a chance to conversate with a lot of them, and they are really thrilled with what was happening here in the kingdom of Eswatini. And for me, Sanela Sibia, as I welcome you to the show, it was just beyond, you know, the conversation of they were just happy to witness Eswatini culture. But I really thought about my conversation with you this morning that we are going to discuss the economic side of it all. If there are tourists in the kingdom of Eswatini, it means we are enjoying some foreign exchange, as well as some other, you know, benefits in terms of hospitality in our hotels, as well as, you know, they go and buy in our local shops. I do want to get your sense as we start by talking about the reed dance, and then we will talk about, you know, the trade fair as well. When we consider the reed dance, often framed as a cultural spectacle, for lack of a better term, what economic value does it really bring to the kingdom of Eswatini, especially this one that had record-breaking numbers?
Thank you, Mr. Ngumalo, and a good morning to you and the viewer. So when we look at our cultural events, basically just all across, just our cultural events, they seem to actually be one of the major drivers of tourism that we have in the kingdom. If you look at the numbers of tourists coming into the country, and also if you look at the number of the booking accommodations within that accommodation spectrum, you can see that they tend to move, or rather, they are there is a core movement between our traditional events and tourism. So that's the first direct effect that we see, the first direct economic effect there. The contribution, as we know, that tourism contributes around 4.8% of GDP directly and around 9.8% of GDP indirectly to the kingdom. So now coming to the Umhlanga reed dance, you realize that this is one of our high yield tourism assets that we need to ensure that we keep, we maintain and we keep doing every year. So you'll around what we're seeing is you'd find that around these days you'd have around 9,000 international visitors. And there are those other issues, Mr. Ngumla. I think we're going to get into that when you look into the economic value now, the value chain within the event itself, what is happening there, what business opportunities are there, and we know the other empowerment opportunities that are there. So it really is one of our major economic activities, and as we showcase our culture as the Kingdom of Eswatini.
Yeah, you know, the numbers that you're mentioning, I cannot wait for the ETA to release the tourism statistics for this past month. Really, really, you know, record-breaking numbers that we saw yesterday at Lutzitsini, and I'm sure those numbers will speak to your assertions in terms of, you know, the how they influence the economy of Eswatini. But beyond the immediate tourism gains that we are talking about, are there measurable long-term linkages that are created through the reed dance, such as, you know, repeat visits that are heightened by, of course, what we witnessed this past weekend?
Yeah, there is actually a lot of long-term linkages, Mr. Ngumalo. If you think of our cultural events, they are actually a showcase of the Eswatini pride. That in itself, and building Eswatini's identity within a global community, again, that in itself is one of those long-term gains that we see. And also, Ngumalo, when you look at the dignitaries that are now beginning to attend Umhlanga, you'll realize that it is not only now becoming a cultural event, but it is also becoming one of those diplomatic events where the country explores new diplomatic ties and the country strengthens existing diplomatic ties. And then overall, we need to look at the fact that there is business at Umhlanga, Mr. Ngumalo. So long term, there are people who know that they need to go there and actually make sure that they are showcasing something at the Umhlanga residence. And if you look at even the provision of the regalia itself, Mr. Ngumalo, so now what we see there is both a local market and an international market for our traditional dress for the Umhlanga ceremony, and the other people that are going to be there. So long term, we're seeing an industry that can only grow and that can only thrive, Mr. Ngumalo, with the right support.
I know you have recommendations as an economist, so should you, right? When it comes to how can we always improve? How can we always leverage what we have and make it times 2, times 3, times whatever better to leverage everything that we can possibly leverage economically? When you look at what we have as Umhlanga, not only as a lifestyle, not only as a way of life, but as a cultural destination as well as the commercial hub that it has become, where can we improve?
So one of the areas which we need to improve on as a country is monetize and localize the production of our traditional regalia. Let's improve our apparel industry to ensure that we are able to to make the mahia and everything that is required for our cultural events within the Kingdom of Eswatini. So we need to localize that value chain, Mr. Ngumalo. And another thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that as a country we are able to formalize, the trading arrangements, the traders within Umhlanga, and, also keep those statistics, Mr. Ngumalo, because it is an event that attracts a lot of people. But if we are not keeping the statistics to know how much commerce actually goes on within Umhlanga, we then tend to miss the bigger picture. We need to ensure that just like we do at the bushfire, that we are able to actually keep records of how much has actually gone in there. And we need the tourism authority to actually do that, Mr. Nguyen.
And then I do want us to turn our attention to the trade fair. It commenced a week and a half ago. What we saw, again, with the trade fair, a lot of innovation. And I know me and you have had a lot of conversations around digitizing and digitalizing. And that was the theme. Once again, you will remember last year, the theme was centered around digitizing as well. The Minister of ICT did win the pavilion that leaned more towards the theme this year, as they should. Maybe I'm biased because that's my mother ministry. But what is your sense of the trade fair 2025 and them really, really leaning towards digitizing and digitalizing the Kingdom of Eswatini and the opportunities therein?
No, I think what we saw in this year's trade fair, Ngumalo, is actually the Eswatini showcasing that we are actually ready to embrace digitalization. Now, that is one of the key industries that are going to move the future, Ngumalo, the industries that are moving economies right now, and the key industries that will move economies well into the future is how well a country and economy embraces digitalization and the new age. So we are seeing all of that happening. And the fact that it has actually become one of those events where we're seeing international companies. And, I think I also saw a store for Zimbabwe tourism there and quite a number of other countries. So now that's the country showcasing, that's the country showcasing itself to the world and the world coming to Eswatini to showcase itself. So now that is actually growth, and I think it was quite a beautiful space this time around. And then in terms of being able to move and growing the economy, these are such exports that we need, Mr. Ngumalo. But what we need to ensure that we are able to do as the ministry in charge is to ensure that we are also able to grow the Eswatini International Trade Fair to the level where we can grow and, attract more of those international investors, so that what you're able to do there is to create this ecosystem or this environment where we're able to share, and showcase Eswatini to the world and make sure that we are there and visible, because that's what a trade fair is supposed to do, attract people, not just locals, get international people to come into Eswatini, find opportunities, and move forward with some of those opportunities.
Interesting indeed. And then perhaps if we look at what stood out for you in terms of the economic impact this year compared to the previous year, when you just, conduct an eye study with the CS Trade Fair. I mean, I went there, I think 3 times. I went on the first weekend because I had to play basketball on the other side. Some of the tournaments they are sponsored. The traffic was, I'm trying to look for a good adjective to describe the traffic. I almost used a really, really bad one that could have been, misinterpreted as a negative connotation. But the traffic was crazy. The roads were jam-packed. To me, that spoke to, this really standing out. But what stood out for you?
For me, what stood out, Mr. Ngumalo, was that technology pavilion. That was a game changer this year. And then there's also the one thing that I've seen happening at the International Trade Fair, which is quite new. There are those sessions, those talks, those conference type of settings. Again, that's a setting where you're able to get companies not only to showcase, but also to share and impact and shape the future, the economic future of the kingdom in terms of how we move around and get around the obstacles as individuals. And the foot traffic for me, Mr. Ngumalo, I hated the vehicle traffic, but the foot traffic, when you got there and you looked at the number of people who were in attendance, it really did, say to me, this is a space of opportunity. And for business people who are here, they are going to make these amends and actually going to make, quite a good linkages coming out of that space.
I'm looking at some of the previous, publications around the trade fair, and I realized that indeed the conversations, around as SMEs are that they are the backbone of the economy, and indeed. One then wants to ask, how effective is the trade fair in positioning SMEs as, seizing regional as well as even continental opportunities? I think we saw Emerson Mnangagwa, the president, as this year's visitor for the king, who also went around all those pavilions there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I actually like about our trade fair the past 2 years. It is not longer a localized spectacle, but rather a regional spectacle. And one thing that we like particularly about it is the fact that we are through IPA we're able to get international companies to come in and actually showcase their own stuff and look for opportunities of how to integrate local companies and local produce into the global value chains, while also bringing in those people to showcase in Eswatini, and that creates space for our SMEs to integrate and link with those individual companies. And we've seen spaces being created over and beyond just the exhibitions. We've seen networking space being created during those events, those side talks, and during the trade fair. So now that space for our SMMEs to actually build into and be able to create that database and create those contacts. And also we know that IPA is quite actively involved in ensuring that our SMMEs get information about what is happening across the globe, where markets are, and where the next big opportunities are going to be. So the International Trade Fair does create that space for our SMMEs. But one thing that I then just looked at, Mr. Ngumalo, when I was looking at the fanfare that was there, was the fact that I think an exhibitor needed money to feel relevant in this year's International Trade Fair. If you looked at the stalls, they were quite beautiful. That said, you then have to ask yourself the question, are we doing enough to ensure that our SMMEs can actually afford to go there and have an exhibition? So I think those are the questions that we need to ask ourselves going forward, think around whether we do need to have an SME pavilion, a pavilion that's going to be there and not have all the fanfare and not have all those nice things, but be effective in ensuring that our SMMEs are there and they're able to exhibit.
Interesting indeed. I think, that is really, really true, that you really needed to invest in your stall to make it stand out and to make it really, really inviting for everyone that was there to enjoy the trade fair this year. I just hope there is that ROI for whatever investment that they made there, because some of them were really, really charming. I want us to look at these two events side by side now, but perhaps maybe before that, there is this argument that many people tend to have around fairs, that they can sometimes feel like ceremonial showcases, for lack of a better term, as opposed to them being platforms for real business deals. Do you believe that our trade fair is able to eventuate or culminate at business deals for real, besides just, what many argue as ceremonial showcases?
Definitely. I've seen deals come out of the trade fair. I've seen quite a lot of business opportunities and integrations come out of the trade fair, right? But I think the question that we need to ask right now is: are we bringing in the right people to showcase, and is it bringing in the right people with that financial muscle and that ability to actually ensure that there are those business deals being made? And the answer would be a big yes. If you look at the people who were there, I mean, for the first time, if I'm not mistaken, all CEOs were there. All CEOs were there, so that was for me a very big and beautiful space for for business networking. I mean, if you were looking to meet a CEO this past week, you had to go to the trade fair. That's where they were. So now that's a space where business deals are made, where you have CEOs and captains of industry. You had ministers on the ground there. It was quite a fertile ground for one to showcase their business and make the right linkages, and it is quite potent in my view, Mr. Nima.
Indeed. Now, looking at these two events side by side, one cultural, one commercial, what does their economic footprint collectively now tell us about Eswatini's strategy for growth in 2025?
For me, one thing I've always marveled when I look at Eswatini, the way we've positioned ourselves as a country, is we are a cultural hub that is able to survive in the modern world. So what that speaks to is sustainable development, Mr. Ngumalo, because as you develop, you don't want to be assimilated into other cultures. The fact that as a kingdom we are able to somehow blend both modernization with our traditional values and make that into an environment that thrives for business somehow speaks a lot and speaks dimensions to people who are talking, environmental, who are talking what is called sustainability, which would include your environmental concerns to quite a number of things, being cultural preservation amongst one of those. I mean, just to look into the Butimba, which I'm sure we're not talking about, but if you look at the way that was done in an environmentally friendly manner, and then we just moved from there into Umhlanga, and then there was the international trade fair. The fact that those activities are able to happen in parallel speaks a lot about how where Eswatini is going. We're maintaining our identity as a kingdom, while at the same time we are getting into the modern world and the digital age, Mr. Nima.
And finally, we are running out of our time here, but I believe we do have ourselves a good 5 minutes. If you are advising government, and I love asking you this question, not only government but private players as well, what would be the one thing to improve, either at the Reed Dance or the trade fair, or every other really important event that we have seen this year that has contributed significantly economically, either to maximize economic returns going forward?
For me is to say, let's create enough space for monetization of our cultural and traditional events. There is a lot of money to be made within that space, but what we need to do is ensure that we have we are able to build an ecosystem that creates that monetization avenue for both the thriving, for our SMEs to thrive, and also for our the patrons to be able to have access to quite a number of those of what they owe to the commodities that they need. So what we need to do as a country is let's ensure that we get the direct benefits, being tourism, and the indirect benefits, being SME growth and basic business growth in Eswatini. And when I look into cultural events, Mr. Ngumalo, I see a lot of space for our apparel industry to actually thrive. We need to get to a point where we're making the MI here domestically. We're making everything domestically and improving on domestic value chains so that Lutsango, Imbali, and everyone who is within that space, they can actually have a business which they are growing, which now supplies what is required in these cultural events. Now that would be sustainable development in its truest sense, Mr. Nima.
Mr. Spear, always appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. This has been Sanele Spear, our economist, giving us his insights on some of the economic benefits that we have as the Kingdom of Eswatini, from leveraging as well as from being true to ourselves through our culture. Of course, we just enjoyed the Reed Dance main day yesterday at Eswatini Royal Residence. Really, really spectacle, beautiful spectacle, show of pageantry, of song, of dance, of unity, of community as the Kingdom of Eswatini with our beautiful culture, but also what we have seen at the Eswatini International Trade Fair, beg your pardon, at Mavuso Sports Center over the past week and a half. Companies from all corners of the country showcasing their products and services, and of course Eswatini TV there at the center, being the main broadcaster of the event, as well as a sponsor to some of those products there. What a beautiful week that we have just wrapped up, as well as enjoying some of these holidays, these 2 holidays that you enjoyed. We hope that you really enjoyed those holidays. As we finish this segment now, we'll go for a net break and we'll be back with our news in English.
Hi, I'm Golda. I work here at the IMF. Our aim is to provide the best possible advice on economic policy to our member countries, helping them to create conditions so everyone prospers from economic growth. One question our economists are always getting: how can we reduce poverty and foster inclusive growth? There are a few ways to think about it. Some say the government should be heavily involved in the economy. with regulations to keep people safe and high taxes that fund and support a healthy, well-educated and inclusive society, even if it's at the expense of higher growth. Others believe that the government should have little or no part to play in the economy. Lower taxation means more money in everyone's pockets. More individual freedom, they say, means more economic growth overall. But maybe there's a target we all could be shooting for: the best policies on inclusion and growth. Essentially, inclusive growth is about making the economic pie bigger and sharing those slices more widely. So, how do we get there? By aiming for a middle ground. Both sides mostly recognize the need for social safety nets, public pensions, unemployment insurance, food programs. These measures prevent extreme poverty and provide a basic standard of living. At the IMF, inclusive growth is central to our work because reducing poverty is in everyone's interest. Part of having a free and equitable society is ensuring we all benefit from its growth, no matter who we are. And it's not just about creating a fair and equal chance to succeed for individuals, regions, or countries. It's about distributing growth fairly for future generations too. Overall, inclusive growth is based on the idea that wealth creation, economic freedom, and equal opportunity can and should coexist.
Right, welcome back. We look at our international news now. Israel's army said it bombed a Gaza City residential tower on Sunday. This was the third such high rise to be struck in as many days, after issuing evacuation orders just hours after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced the military was deepening its assault on the Gaza Strip's key urban center.
The Aruya Tower, pulverized southwest of Gaza City. The Israeli army say this residential tower was occupied by Hamas. For several days, it's been destroying buildings suspected of harboring the Islamist group. Here, evacuation orders had been issued according to the Israeli government. Unlike this school in the city, which was also targeted on Sunday, where the Al-Shifa hospital says several people were killed.
We were sleeping in the classroom when suddenly we found ourselves under the rubble, concrete and stones of this size.
The Israeli army is tightening its grip.
We are deepening our operations on the outskirts of Gaza City and inside Gaza City. We are eliminating terrorist infrastructure. We are eliminating criminal terrorist leaders. And we've established another humanitarian space to allow the civilian population to leave for a safe place and also to receive humanitarian aid there.
Earlier on Sunday, 2 projectiles were fired from Gaza towards Israel. Islamic Jihad, a movement allied with Hamas, claimed responsibility for the attacks. Currently, the Israeli military controls 40% of Gaza City and about 3/4 of the overall territory.
Hamas said it is ready to immediately sit at the negotiating table, following what it described as some ideas from the American side that are aimed at reaching a ceasefire agreement. Now, their statement came soon after U.S. President Donald Trump said he had issued his last warning to Hamas to accept a deal to release hostages in Gaza.
A possible end to the deadlock in talks between Israel and Hamas, bringing a glimmer of hope for a ceasefire. On Sunday, Donald Trump issued what he called a last warning to Hamas, telling them to release all the remaining hostages in Gaza and accept Washington's ceasefire proposal or face consequences. A few hours later, the Islamist group said it was ready to resume negotiations.
We received some ideas from the American side through mediators to reach a ceasefire agreement, and Hamas is prepared to immediately sit at the negotiating table.
The Forum for Hostages Families welcomed what it called a true breakthrough.
The personal guarantee of the President of the United States is a historic step without precedent. Such an agreement would advance a broader regional agreement, secure the release of all hostages, allow soldiers and reservists to return home.
Returning to Washington from New York, where he had been attending the US Open tennis final, Donald Trump said he had had good discussions and could see an agreement taking shape.
Again, it's a problem we want to solve for the Middle East, for Israel, for everybody. But it's a problem we're going to get done. So they have hostages. It could be a little bit less than 20 because they tend to die, right?
Trump's proposal would see the release of all hostages on the first day of an eventual ceasefire in exchange for several thousand Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. But Hamas is insistent that all Israeli troops withdraw from Gaza as part of the deal, at a time when the Israeli military is expanding its operations in the enclave.
Russia hit Ukraine's capital with drone and missiles on Sunday in the largest aerial attack on the country since the war began. They killed at least 2 people and leaving smoke rising from the roof of a key government building.
The barrage of drones and missiles fired by Russia has hit several buildings across Ukraine, including for the first time the government building in Kyiv. This started a fire on the roof and top floors, put out by firefighters. The government's first reaction after being targeted: buildings can be restored, but lives lost cannot be brought back. Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko called on the international community to act against Russia.
We need to strengthen sanction pressure, primarily against Russian oil and gas. New restrictions are needed to hit the Kremlin's military machine. Most importantly, Ukraine needs weapons.
Russia's attack hit mainly residential buildings across the Ukrainian capital.
The 2 city districts of Donetsky and Sviatoshinsky have suffered the most. This is where we are now, where a Shahed drone hit a residential building.
The strikes in the middle of the night killed several people in their homes, including an infant.
I was sleeping. I heard the explosion. The house shook. I get dressed, get out to have a look, and the 6th floor balcony was on fire.
In Zaporizhia, bombs hit residential buildings and this kindergarten. Russia has stepped up its attacks in recent weeks, and Ukraine's allies have been unable to push for talks to end the war or bring a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Ukraine said it hit a Russian oil pipeline in the Bryansk region. Energy exports have been Russia's main way to finance the war.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Sunday said he was prepared to move forward on new sanctions on Moscow, hours after Russia fired its biggest ever aerial barrage at Ukraine. Russian missiles and drones rained down across Ukraine early on Sunday, killing 4 people and setting government offices in the capital, Kyiv, ablaze.
The Ukrainian capital ravaged by flames. On Sunday in Kyiv, rescue helicopters took turns trying to extinguish the fires, particularly at the government headquarters, which was hit for the first time by a Russian drone attack. Residential areas were also hit.
They are scum. We have been attacked by a species other than humans. Yet I am Russian, originally from the suburbs of Moscow. I never thought my people would be capable of this.
Sunday saw Russia launch its largest drone attack since the start of the war, firing over 800 drones at targets across Ukraine.
It is clear that Russia is seeking to harm Ukraine. Its attacks are becoming increasingly bold. This is a clear sign that Putin is testing the world. But will the world continue to accept this and resign itself to it?
A question immediately put to the US president.
Are you ready to move to the second phase of sanctions against Russia or punishing Putin?
More than 3 weeks after the meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Alaska, Negotiations to find a solution to the conflict seem more deadlocked than ever.
2 Palestinian gunmen opened fire at a bus stop on the outskirts of Jerusalem on Monday, killing 6 people in what police described as a terrorist attack, one of the deadliest in the city in the past few years.
Gunshots ring out at a bus stop in the remote neighborhood of occupied East Jerusalem. Police say 2 Palestinian attackers from the West Bank arrived by car and opened fire on commuters. Several people were killed and more than a dozen injured.
When we arrived at the scene, we still heard shooting. We couldn't know exactly what was going on.
We did assist with, transporting some of the patients that were severely wounded to the nearby hospitals. And you have the Zaka team on scene as well, who was taking care, ensuring the proper respect for the patients that unfortunately didn't make it.
Authorities say a security officer and a civilian responded quickly, returned fire and killed the attackers. Later, the Israeli Prime Minister arrived on the scene.
We are now in pursuit, surrounding the villages from which the murderers came, and we will get to everyone who assisted them and everyone who sent them, and we will act with even harsher measures.
Israeli forces have been deployed in nearby West Bank villages as part of searches for potential accomplices and security operations following the attack. Hamas praised the shooting as a natural response to Israel's actions, but did not claim responsibility. This attack is one of the deadliest in Jerusalem since the Gaza war began nearly 2 years ago.
South Korea on Saturday said it was deeply concerned over the arrest of more than 300 of its nationals during a U.S. immigration and customs enforcement. It was a raid on a Hyundai plant, hailed as the largest development project in Georgia. Now, the arrests were the result of a months-long special investigation, a Homeland Security investigation official said.
As US Immigration and Customs Enforcement conducted their largest ever raid on a single site, some tried to flee and were fished out of the factory's sewage pond. Construction has stopped at Hyundai's massive car battery facility in Georgia after US authorities arrested 475 people there, most of whom South Korean nationals, accusing them of illegal work. Officials said it was the culmination of a months-long investigation.
This was not an immigration operation where agents went into the premises, rounded up folks, and put them on buses.
Agents did, though, go into the premises, round up people, and put them on buses. Most were taken to an immigration detention center near Florida. One man who used to work at the site spoke about the fear caused by such operations.
You know, nobody in America should ever be treated like that or have to work in these kind of conditions.
It's caused uproar in South Korea. At a summit last month, the country pledged $150 billion in US investments, including $26 billion from Hyundai Motor. Indeed, Georgian officials had billed the megasite as the biggest single investment in the state's history.
The economic activities of our companies investing in the United States and the interests of our citizens must not be unduly violated during the course of US law enforcement.
Hyundai Motor says it will investigate the employment practices of its suppliers and subcontractors and bring the site under its full control.
Problems with the cable that has likely caused a Lisbon funicular railway popular with tourists to hurtle down a hill, killing at least 16 people and injuring another 22 when it crashed into a building. This is according to a preliminary report.
Tributes continue to pour in at the site of Wednesday's deadly funicular crash here in Lisbon. Accident inspectors are now looking into the incident. On Saturday, Portugal's National Transport Safety Office stated that a cable linking 2 cabins disconnected, not long after it passed a visual check.
According to the evidence observed so far, the scheduled maintenance plan was up to date, and a scheduled visual inspection had been conducted on the morning of the accident, which detected no anomalies in the vehicle's cable or braking systems.
According to the Bureau, the brakeman had tried to activate emergency brakes, but it's unclear whether another automatic brake came on as it was meant to. The Bureau will release a preliminary report within 45 days. A separate investigation is being carried out by the prosecutor's office. The head of Lisbon's public transport operator has defended the equipment maintenance policy in the wake of the crash, which saw the upper carriage of a funicular railway hurtle into the side of a building. The incident claimed 16 lives, including 11 foreign nationals. For their loved ones, the past few days have been devastating.
I've been up and down, crying and not crying, so my two nieces are shattered, of course. Imagine you lose your two parents in one shot, bang, like that. So it's very, very difficult because I was very close to my brother. He was my idol.
A popular tourist attraction and mode of transport for residents, the 140-year-old funicular is built to travel up and down Lisbon's steep slopes. According to local media, the number of passengers using the 3 funiculars managed by Lisbon's public transport operator increased by 53% between 2022 and 2024.
The collapse of the French government means that many legislative projects that were underway are now grinding to a halt. In addition to the big question of how to balance the budget, the items now on hold include everything from the proposed reform of public broadcasting to a final vote on a bill that would give terminally ill patients the right to end their lives.
From the energy industry to public broadcasting to legislation on euthanasia and criminal justice, the collapse of the government means delay or worse for a slew of bills that were under consideration by French lawmakers. Already passed by the Senate in July, a bill laying out the country's energy policy through 2030 is now in limbo. The bill allocated how much of France's energy would come from nuclear and renewable sources and was seen as part of the country's goal to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. Also on hold, a controversial proposed reform of public broadcasting being pushed by Culture Minister Rachida Dati. The bill was due to return to the Assembly this fall, and many expected it would pass, creating a holding company to oversee and possibly make cuts to Radio France, France Télévisions, and the National Audiovisual Institute. The bill could now be postponed indefinitely. Already delayed once by the government's collapse in June of last year, this May the National Assembly adopted a bill allowing terminally ill patients to end their lives, and a second bill that expands palliative care. But with the government's collapse, it's unclear when a final vote on either of the bills could happen. Criminal justice reform championed by the Justice Minister is also now on the back burner. The proposed reforms included changes to sentencing guidelines intended to give judges more leeway in handing out punishments. Economic reforms in France have also been tabled, including a bill to fight social security and tax fraud, which the former prime minister had hoped would save more than €2 billion in next year's budget. The government's collapse is also reverberating on the other side of the globe in the French overseas semi-autonomous territory of New Caledonia, which was granted a new status just 2 months ago, enabling citizens to have dual nationality with France. There's been political upheaval over when to hold local elections, and the government collapse on the mainland could complicate discussions there and ultimately delay those contests.
Norwegians began voting on Monday in an election where much of the campaigning has focused on domestic issues, which include the cost of living, health care, inequality, education, and the possibility of abolishing a world tax, which has divided the two main camps. There's a report.
Keep, cut, or abolish the wealth tax. Many Norwegians headed to the polls on Monday, hoping to resolve an issue that has polarized the country since 1892.
It's an unnecessary tax that makes me, as a self-employed person and owner of a business, pay tax without making money.
Reduce inequalities, because Norway is a rich country and we need to, after my opinion, to distribute our wealth differently.
The country's Progress Party wants to scrap the tax completely, dubbing it detrimental to the economy.
Some of the Norwegians that are really creating a lot of jobs are successful businessmen. They are moving to Switzerland, to Sweden, and this is not sustainable for Norway.
The wealth tax is a levy of up to 1.1% on assets and shares worth more than 1.76 million kroner, or around 150,000 euros. The leader of the Socialist Party, Kirsti Bergstø, has a wall of shame in her office with the names of those who want to abolish the inequality tax. And while it has managed to polarize many in the prosperous country, others point out that issues like international relations and climate change haven't been given the attention they deserve.
The main topic was kind of ridiculous because it was about the taxes on people's fortunes, which I don't think is the most important subject in the world. And I think it's a little embarrassing that it dominated the election.
Spain, Switzerland and Norway are the only 3 European countries to tax capital in this way. Local media reported that in 2022, more than 30 billionaires and multimillionaires left the country. But if the tax is scrapped, many of the richest Norwegians would pay almost nothing.
Argentina's opposition Pessimist Party triumphed on Sunday in legislative elections in the key province of Buenos Aires, leaving President Javier Milei's ruling party in a distant second place, the provisional office tally showed.
A sweeping setback for Argentina's president Javier Milei, whose Libertad Avanza party only took around a third of the vote in a key Buenos Aires provincial election this Sunday, losing out to the left-leaning Fuerza Patria coalition, who swept up almost half of the ballots. Despite the poor showing, he's refusing to change tack.
The first thing to accept is the results, and today the results have not been positive and we have had an electoral setback and we must accept that. But we will not take a step back, not even an inch in government policy. Not only are we resolved in this, but we will step things up and go further.
Milei was elected in 2023 on a libertarian program, but his austerity policies have proved unpopular, and he's going through a period of political turbulence. His sister, Karina Milei, who's Secretary General of the presidency, is implicated in a graft scandal. She's accused of taking bribes in exchange for medical contracts at Argentina's disability agency. In August, the siblings had rubbish and stones thrown at them during a campaign event. Former two-term president from the center-left, Christina Kirchner, has gloated at Milei's position on social media.
Did you see that, Milei? Get out of your bubble, brother. Things are getting heavy.
For the first time since taking office, Milei has seen Congress override one of his key decisions, blocking his veto of a bill to raise disability benefits. The former economist argued the measure would undermine efforts to balance Argentina's budget. Milei's political turmoil comes just a few weeks ahead of legislative elections on the 26th of October, which is set to be another litmus test for the leader.
Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba announced on Sunday that he will resign following growing calls from within his party to take responsibility for a historic defeat in July's parliamentary election.
In less than a year, he's out as Japan's prime minister. Shigeru Ishiba deciding to step down before being pushed out after his Liberal Democratic Party announced its intention to possibly hold an early leadership election on Monday. His final act as prime minister, ironing out the details of a trade deal with the U.S.
Now that negotiations concerning the U.S. tariff measures have reached a turning point, I thought this was the appropriate time to step aside and make way for the next prime minister.
Ishiba has instructed his Liberal Democratic Party to hold an emergency leadership race while he continues his duties until a successor is chosen. Since clinching the top job, Ishiba has been beset by difficulties. Voters angry over rising living costs handed his party major defeats. The LDP, which has governed Japan for most of the country's post-war era, lost its majorities in both houses of parliament, an unprecedented rout for the ruling coalition. In the aftermath, Ishiba has faced growing criticism, with calls mounting within his own party for him to step aside. In Tokyo, residents reacted to the news.
It's a shock to me. I'm not sure whether it's his true intention or not.
Things will be the same no matter who becomes Prime Minister. I think it'll be interesting if they try to elect someone from a different party.
One thing certain, the next Prime Minister will be taking the helm at a challenging time for the world's fourth largest economy.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer brought a new deputy and foreign and interior ministers on Friday in a sweeping reshuffle that is intended to restore his authority after the resignation of his deputy, Angela Rayner. Starmer could do little to protect Rayner after Britain's independent advisor ruled that she had breached the ministerial code by failing to pay the correct tax.
Known for her straight-talking, bold style, Angela Rayner was one of the Labour Party's commanding figures. But forced to follow the advice she'd given to so many Conservative politicians, she has now resigned from her post as Deputy Prime Minister, Housing Secretary and Deputy Party Leader. Her exit comes after a standards advisor found she'd breached the ministerial code when she underpaid stamp duty property tax on a second home by £40,000, something Rayner has said was an honest mistake that she deeply regrets.
I relied on that legal advice that I received that said that I was liable to pay the standard stamp duty. Subsequently to that, with all of the media reports that have been coming out, I took expert counsel advice on all of my affairs to ensure that everything was done proper. And that expert counsel said that the advice that I received was inaccurate.
Her resignation means Starmer is reshuffling his cabinet. David Lammy has been appointed as the new Deputy Prime Minister, while Yvette Cooper has stepped in as Foreign Secretary. Shabana Mahmood has taken her post as Home Secretary. This probably wasn't the reset Starmer was hoping for after his first year saw his poll ratings plummet. Labour is facing a strong challenge from the anti-immigration Reform Party led by Nigel Farage, who are holding a national conference in Birmingham this Friday, an opportunity for Farage to attack Labour and opposition Conservatives.
But in the middle of this meltdown of these two parties that have dominated for 100 years British politics, in the middle of all of this, there is a new, strong, unified party that speaks with one voice.
Farage told attendees they were about to witness a big rift in the Labour Party and to prepare for an early general election in 2020.
Tens of thousands of supporters of Brazil's former president Bolsonaro marched on Sunday during Independence Day, protesting against the Supreme Court. This was ahead of the Supreme Court's verdict this week in his alleged coup trial. They were waving flags and chanting. Demonstrators accused the court of bias, underscoring deep political divisions in Brazil.
President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva marked Brazil's Independence Day at the head of a military parade. Notably absent, his predecessor, Jair Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro is under house arrest as Brazil's High Court deliberates whether he plotted a coup after losing the 2022 election. Lula had harsh words for the former president.
The role of some Brazilian politicians who encourage attacks on Brazil is unacceptable. They were elected to serve the Brazilian people, but they only defend their own interests. They are traitors to the nation, and history will not forgive them.
Brazil's political left came out for Independence Day with slogans promoting the country's sovereignty. They say the right is catering to U.S. President Donald Trump. Outraged over what he called a witch hunt against Bolsonaro, the American president levied 50% tariffs against Brazil in July.
September 7th is a significant date for us because even though it marks independence, we are still not truly independent, so we have to keep fighting.
Pro-Bolsonaro protesters took to the streets for the holiday, waving Brazilian, Israeli, and American flags. They have come out to support a measure in the right-wing Senate to grant amnesty to Bolsonaro supporters, who stormed the Brazilian Congress building in January 2023.
Down there, just a few meters away, the 7th of September parade is taking place. But here is a gathering of patriots who are fighting for amnesty because many people were unjustly convicted.
It is expected Bolsonaro will be found guilty in the coming days. If convicted, the former president faces up to 43 years in prison.
Colombian authorities are awaiting a decision from the United States on whether to grant Bogota certification in the fight against drug trafficking. $500 million are at stake. The country is therefore stepping up its efforts to appease Washington.
Shovel in hand, Colombia's Minister of Defense has a new mission: demonstrate his country's willingness to fight against drug trafficking. Pedro Sanchez traveled to the Ecuadorian border to visit a cocoa eradication program, all part of a communication campaign to convince an important ally, the United States of America.
If we don't get certification, then obviously the traffickers win and nations lose. Certification is, in a way, a symbol of cooperation, of alliance, of trust, but also of capabilities, of meaningful support that allows us to act with greater force because teamwork works better.
Washington has until the 15th of September to decide if it gives Bogota that crucial certification. At risk is nearly $500 million in US funding to combat cartels and left-wing guerrillas funded by cocaine trafficking. In the last few weeks, violent fighting broke out between the Colombian army and different narco-trafficking groups, where dozens of people were killed. The Trump administration is taking a hard-line approach to fighting cartels in the region. The US deployed warships near the Venezuelan coast. The Colombians, though, called the move counterproductive.
There is no doubt that countries in the region are committed to the fight against drug trafficking. But this disproportionate American presence, given the tensions between Venezuela and the United States, compels us to warn that interference is not possible.
The situation is getting worse. According to the UN as well as Colombian authorities, coca cultivation in Colombia has increased by 70% since 2022.
Well, that marks the end of our international news. Now we'll go for a net break. We'll be back shortly.
lesinye isikhathi ngaphandle kwalesi
aba research bafunze.
Being risky means ukuthi nalokuwa kwayo kulula.
Nathi kufuna senze ukukhiqiza lokusebenza.
Welcome back. You are still watching Kusile Breakfast Show. In this next global update, Chinese smartphone giant Xiaomi may not be a household name globally, but it succeeded where Apple failed by launching its own electric car. Now, that's a feat Apple couldn't accomplish despite a decade of effort and billions of dollars spent. Now, Xiaomi is turning its sights on Tesla.
This is the world's largest military.
An elaborate military parade showcasing new weapons, really a show of force for China on the global stage.
Xi Jinping has made it a stated goal to modernize China's military and turn it into a fighting force capable of winning wars.
But behind the choreography, it's undergoing its most serious leadership shakeup in decades. During Xi's third term, 15 of the 79 generals promoted under him have either gone missing or been investigated. It's the biggest purge of China's military personnel since the chaotic Mao Zedong era ended in 1976.
Every time you think, surely this is as big as it can get and as high as it can go, it does seem to just keep getting bigger.
He obviously wants to centralize control, even at the expense of having people that he himself has personally appointed removed from that party structure.
This is key as Xi nears a potential fourth term that would stretch his time in power to 20 years. The global consequences will be far-reaching, with tensions between the US and China rising on many fronts. And then there's this.
A top US admiral says signs suggest China is sticking to its ambitions to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027.
The competition between the United States and China is the most dangerous and the most impactful when it comes to the militaries of these two countries. Anything that changes the dynamic there is inevitably going to change the way the world works politically, economically, technologically, in big and small ways.
So what's behind these unprecedented purges? And what could they mean for China and the global stage? China's military is unlike any other in the world. First, because of its leadership. While most military forces are controlled by the state, the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, is run by a political party, the Chinese Communist Party. It's divided into four main forces. There's the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, and the Rocket Force, which handles China's missiles. They're all under the command of the Central Military Commission, or CMC, which in turn is controlled by the Central Committee, the highest level of authority within the party. Both bodies are headed by Xi Jinping.
So the Central Military Commission is essentially the apex military body in China. It is in charge of commanding the military, and it's also a political body as well, making sure that the right sort of political thought is running through the military.
So that's how it's run, but it's the scale of the PLA that gives it such heft.
Relative to the militaries of other global superpowers, China has on paper a huge numerical advantage.
You can see that here. China has the largest number of active military personnel in the world by far.
But what they've struggled with historically, and what they're trying to change now, is the modernization aspect of those forces.
That's where Xi Jinping comes in. Since taking power in 2012, Xi has more than doubled military spending to $296 billion. He also established a goal of modernizing the military forces by 2035 and making them world-class by 2050.
Part of that has been investing in new technologies.
It also involved restructuring the PLA in a way that would better suit China's global ambitions.
The PLA was created as a force to fight and win the Chinese Civil War, so mainly a land-based army. That's not what China needs today. China needs an air force, it needs a navy, it needs nuclear weapons. That's what Xi Jinping wanted to transform the PLA into.
The other thing that he has done is excise parts of the leadership that he feels or that had been shown to be corrupt or disloyal to the party.
Which takes us to Xi Jinping's unprecedented corruption crackdown. Since Xi came into power, hundreds of senior officials across all sectors of the government have been taken down, including in the military.
U.S. intelligence revealing widespread corruption is behind President Xi's sweeping purge of China's military.
Our understanding is corruption was rampant in the military. I mean, we've had cases of people at the very top of the military hierarchy being tried and convicted of taking bribes to help others secure promotions.
Xi has also seen how Putin got onto the battlefield in Ukraine and discovered that corruption had meant that a lot of the equipment he thought he had wasn't actually up to par. But at the same time, corruption probes in China and in the military have a history of being political.
This is evident when you take a look at the officials Xi has removed since taking power. During his first term, 3 high-ranking security and military officials were ousted. The 3 of them had all been appointed by Xi's predecessors and were associated with his political rivals. But it's been during Xi's 3rd term where things have escalated.
In the summer of 2023, there was an announcement that China was going to investigate corruption involving equipment purchases going right back to 2017. And then sort of within weeks of that announcement, we started to get reports that very senior people from China's rocket force were being hauled off, taken away, probed, and essentially ousted from their roles.
During this period, 15 generals who had been promoted under Xi himself have either gone missing or been investigated. That's a major shift. None of Xi's predecessors ever purged generals they had personally appointed. Among the most high-profile of them are Li Shangfu, Miao Hua, and He Weidong. All 3 men were associates of Xi and sat on the Central Military Commission. 2 of these oustings have been confirmed publicly.
Li Shangfu, now the shortest reigning defense minister ever in China.
Miao Hua is being suspended.
But little is known about the fate of He Weidong.
If China's political system is opaque and hard to read, its military system is even more murky. Often we're looking at very sort of specific events for a sign. It's sort of a game of like, you know, an opposite of Where's Wally? You're trying to like look at who isn't there when they should be.
There are absences that are noticed of senior party officials, and that is the first indication that something is wrong.
That's what happened in April during a routine tree planting ceremony with China's most senior military leaders.
As the state media sort of camera scans across the military leaders, then people realize He Weidong is not there. He was one of the first people in over a decade to not have to work his way up the Central Military Commission. And then within a very short space of time, he's gone. And he's someone that was meant to be a loyalist to Xi Jinping.
If He Weidong's ousting is confirmed, it would mean that 3 of the members of the CMC have been purged, leaving the highest proportion of vacancies since the Mao era. So why is this important? Well, it all comes down to the thorny issue of succession.
Xi Jinping's power doesn't come from his role as president of the country. It really comes from his position as chairman of the Central Military Commission.
Whoever is chairman of the military commission, and also who is maybe vice chairman, tells you who is in power and who is maybe coming up next.
In fact, both Xi Jinping and his predecessor, Hu Jintao, became vice chairs of the CMC before rising to general secretary.
Xi has now purged so many people from the CMC that there are many vacancies on that body. And at some point, he's going to have to fill them. And so the people that he does pick will be very closely scrutinized because people are wondering, will any of them be the next leader of China?
One of the things behind the purges is to create a degree of loyalty to him as the paramount leader of China. This plays into his larger ambitions for China, and it's all part of the national rejuvenation that he has talked about since he's been in power. This includes what he describes as the unification with Taiwan, and that is why the military is so important as well.
Beijing has always endeavored to bring Taiwan into the Chinese state peacefully if it can, but would be willing to use military force if it had to.
Which finally takes us to how the purges could impact China's military readiness.
A Chinese invasion of Taiwan would be incredibly difficult. In theory, it could go 2 ways. If you're removing corrupt leadership, then it could improve capability to carry out their mission. On the other hand, if you remove leaders who are popular, they could hurt morale.
So when Xi Jinping has to oust his loyalists, what does that mean? Some people will say it shows you how powerful Xi Jinping is. But then there are other people who will say it's not a sign of power when the people that you appoint in key positions in the military you can't trust.
This creates a degree of paranoia because nobody really knows whether they're in favor or out of favor. And that ensures that Xi Jinping holds the power right where he wants it, in the palm of his hand.
And in another global business update, the Swatch Group is credited with saving the Swiss watch industry in the 1980s. But right now, the company is under pressure, hit by a spending slowdown in China. U.S. President Donald Trump's trade war has only piled on to its problems.
Bright colours, wild patterns, artists on the dial, even a watch designed by a pig. That's Swatch. But these days, the brand's actually a lot broader.
The Swatch Group is one of the biggest forces in watchmaking in Europe and in the world.
It's valued at over $9 billion, with more than a dozen brands under its umbrella.
150 production sites out of Switzerland, the quintessential Swiss watchmaking company.
The Swatch watch was basically the brainchild of Nicholas Hayek and his team.
And when he launched it, he was credited with changing the perception of Swiss watchmaking and saving the industry. But right now,
the Swatch Group has been under pressure because its performance hasn't been great.
It's now one of the most shorted stocks in Europe. That means investors are betting against it, and it's already trading at a 16-year low. August brought an even greater blow. Swiss watchmaking was suddenly central to an international trade crisis.
The Swiss president is expected to leave Washington without a deal.
So they're stuck with that 39% tariff.
It's the highest rate Trump has slapped on any industrial nation.
With all that in mind, and amid criticism of leadership, can Swatch turn its fortunes around? Switzerland means many things to people, but it might be best known for its watches.
Speak of timepieces and you speak of Switzerland.
See?
Watches are so Swiss. It's right up there with chocolate and cheese in terms of how people really view the national identity.
And no more so than 42-year-old Swatch.
The Swatch Group is the biggest watches manufacturer by volume globally, and number 3, if we think about it by retail value, behind Rolex and just behind Richemont Group.
Its brands get everywhere, from 007's wrist,
your watch,
how strong is it,
to the Peloton, even up here. And it's got lots of brands.
At the very bottom level, there's Swatch, which is very inexpensive. Its sister brand, Flick Flack, which is watches for kids. And then just above that, there's brands like Tissot and Longines, which are middle-range watches. And then as you go up, there's fancier, more rarefied brands. There's Harry Winston, which is watches with lots of diamonds.
There are 2 brands at the very high end, Breguet and Blancpain. And then we run through their biggest brand would be Omega. The biggest part of the Swatch business is its mid-range.
We'll return to this in a tick.
The Seiko quartz gives you accuracy you can see as well as hear, as the second hand moves in precise 1-second intervals.
In the 1980s, in the watchmaking industry, traditional mechanical watchmakers were really falling victim to a craze for very inexpensive quartz watches, which were mostly made out of Japan.
And Seiko was the biggest commercial threat.
And no matter how beautiful and handmade mechanical watches were, they just couldn't be as accurate as these quartz watches, and they were also much more expensive.
Swiss watchmakers weren't equipped to mass produce or compete on price, and the impact was devastating.
We saw 1,600 specialist watchmakers down to 600 over a 10-year period.
Then the Swiss had an idea.
A low-priced watch that could be fun and interchangeable and add an expression to your fashion sense.
Just take the quartz mechanism and Japanese innovation, then mass produce it on your own terms.
So the name Swatch, it doesn't stand for Swiss watch, it stands for second watch.
And there were thousands of them, including that one from Old MacDonald's finest. Sure, they told the time, but really they told the world who you were.
This was huge. Swatch was incredibly well received by consumers globally.
Launched in 1983, Swatch sold over 1 million of them in the first year.
Swatch, a new wave of Swiss watches.
By the early 90s, sales soared to about 20 times that annually. The company used that momentum to revive some of its struggling high-end brands and acquire new ones.
It provided a financial base to support other companies and traditional mechanical watchmaking, because suddenly tons of people were running out to buy these colorful, fun watches to add to their collection, and it really turned around the prospects for not just the Swatch Group, but of the whole Swiss watchmaking industry.
Decades later, the market's changed. Phones and smartwatches have chipped away at the lower-end range, leaving luxury as the main engine for growth. You can see that trend here. The volume of low-end watches sold, represented in orange, has been on the decline. The impact is even more striking when analysed by value. Luxury watches, shown in blue, account for an increasingly bigger share of revenue compared to low and mid-range watches. That evolution hasn't favoured Swatch, given its plethora of mid-range brands, and its recent troubles run deeper. Profit was down almost 90% in the first half of 2025. A few things explained this. First, China.
The market in China has really softened.
The spending slump hit luxury brands across the board, but mid-market Swatch more than most. In 2024, Asia made up 53% of its sales, with China alone accounting for 27%.
Brands in the mid-range have struggled more than those at the very high end or the lower end. We've seen a lowered consumer sentiment globally, so it's been a double whammy for the Swatch Group versus its high-end luxury peer group. There is a hope that the company can do better on the back of China really starting to see a little bit more improvement, but it's very slow and gradual improvement.
The luxury sector is facing almost a perfect storm at the moment, and it's not clear whether US consumers will ride to the rescue because they're facing pressures.
Which brings us to the second big challenge. In August, the US imposed a 39% tariff on imports from Switzerland, steeper than the 31% it had previously threatened.
These are one of the highest rates the US has imposed on the entire world.
This came as a complete surprise to the Swiss.
Tariffs are a big headache for the luxury sector, particularly Swiss watches. Any kind of increase in the price is unhelpful. Over the last 5 years, luxury companies have all put up their prices. That gives them less wiggle room for further increases.
These are two serious external headwinds, but they aren't the only reasons for Swatch looking scuffed. Remember Nicholas Hayek? Now his son runs the business, and his daughter chairs the board. The family and related parties control 44% of the voting rights, and they've had, at times, a tempestuous relationship with shareholders.
It doesn't particularly engage with investors in the same way as other groups. It's really run as a private company.
So why not do that? They floated the idea, but
the problem is how. To do that, any buyer, whether it's private equity, would have to take on a lot of debt.
Some investors have tried to force changes.
The company's super conservatively structured, so a bit of external help can go a long way in improving the execution here.
Stephen Wood, an activist investor, attempted to win a seat on the board. He was defeated, but he's challenging the outcome. Activist campaigns in luxury are quite unusual, and this just underlines the frustration among investors with the Swatch Group.
Swatch has responded to criticism from analysts and investors by saying the industry shouldn't be focused exclusively on the wealthy. Swatch has managed to create more mainstream buzz as recently as 2022.
The Moonswatch was a version of Omega's flagship model, the Moonwatch, which is a Speedmaster that was worn on 6 moon missions. And it became very popular. And they sold more than 1 million of the original versions, and they expected to sell something like 500,000. So it was a huge difference for the bottom line for the company.
Of course, we knew this is a bomb, but that it was such an overwhelming success, yes, that was a surprise.
Trouble was, this was an exception.
Swatch has a little bit fallen out of the conversation in terms of making exciting new product that appeals to young people, being really relevant when it comes to the right spokespeople, using the right influencers. They just aren't really making a lot of products that are like really getting people jazzed up.
Some of that comes down to its isolation from other brands.
Swatch owns most of its own stores, and so it doesn't need to show stuff to retailers the way that other brands do. That kind of split them off from the storytelling of the rest of the industry.
The Swatch Group still commands a powerful name and rich heritage, but heritage alone doesn't sell watches.
So much of watchmaking is based on perception, and you really have to have people think that not only is your watch well made, not only is it beautiful, but also it's cool and it's coveted and it has a story behind it.
Right, and we've just seen their reports coming in from Bloomberg on China's fastest growing tech giant Xiaomi and Swatch Swiss. We'll go for a net break. After that, we'll come back. Swiss and I will be wrapping the show.
Eswatini TV has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Eswatini Communications Commission. We are committed to reporting news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. For any complaints of our programming, please contact us on 2411-9600 or email info@eswatinitv.co.za. You can also contact the Eswatini Communications Commission on 2406-7000 or write a letter to ECCOM on PO Box 7811 Mbabane. Email address is info@ecom.org.za.
Kude lesinye isikhathi ngaphandle kwalesi
aba research bafunze.
Being risky means ukuthi nalokuwa kwayo kulula.
Nathi kufuna senze ukukhicita lokusembili.
Four minutes before 8. This has been the Tuesday edition of Kusile Breakfast Show right here on Eswatini TV. So, you know, we're starting the week for many. It's only a Tuesday, but yes, this is us starting the week. Yesterday was a holiday, very beautiful holiday. I know you didn't ask, but my takeaway from the Umhlangari dance was Kukia Gwendfuna Yembali Vivano. Always still the show.
Congratulations to her once again. I think she's been receiving a lot of congratulatory messages from Eswatini after their appointment by His Majesty the King Kusile Salo Abayindvuna Yembali, officially well-deserved too. We've been seeing how she's been leading her life. Those who know. So very much well-deserved, a great ambassador for Mbali as well as for the Swati culture. So what a great shot as well. But you know, the whole spectacle for me was everything. Like I said earlier, the numbers, it was insane. The arena was so packed. Some people the way but that speaks to, you know, how beautiful and charming our culture is.
You know, it amazes me how we, if not the only country in the world, are among the few that are actually able to unite thousands through 100%. Culture. You know, the people that come through for either it's Umhlanga or it's Ingwala, they just come in numbers. And I really do hope that, yes, the visitations, they translate to eventually, as a government, as a country, attaining our tourism goals. You may know, Guti, the country intends to at least receive about 2 million visitors per year. Actually, that's by the year 2027. And then actually those tourists be able to at least, help us generate revenue of at least 2 billion emalangeni.
It's happening. It really is happening because, we saw Mhlanga last year. The numbers were massive, but we saw them probably times 4 this year what we saw last year. So I think those players that are supposed to be playing their roles in attracting people to come in Eswatini, but that responsibility, as His Majesty always says when he's with other countries, they are ambassadors of the country as well, and I suppose that permeates the whole world. And indeed, they share those experiences that indeed, when we come to Eswatini, we feel a deeper sense of community, of love, and of warmth. But just to piggyback on what the Minister of Tinkhundla said there after wrapping up that traditional leaders conference, that we are seeing, something unique here. We normally go to other countries to benchmark for whatever development that happens. But when it comes to culture, or when it comes to traditional leadership, they have come to Eswatini to try and benchmark on how they can go and lead better in their traditional spheres. So I suppose you can see how that intertwines with our culture, the traditional leadership, as well as our way of life. Indeed, we are leaders and we'll continue to lead, and the numbers are growing.
Allow me to emphasize His Majesty's words as we wrap up the show. You are an ambassador of the Kingdom of Eswatini. Until the next edition, thank you so much for tuning in. Take care.